Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's begin. Daniel Harper had driven past that bus stop 1,000 times. Maybe more. It sat on the edge of Route 47, just outside the town limits of Millbrook, Indiana. A weathered concrete bench, a rusted metal sign that hadn't seen a bus in over a decade, tall grass pushing through cracks in the pavement. Most days, it was empty. But not today. 2 girls sat there, side by side. One older, maybe 12, with hair the color of autumn leaves pulled back in a messy braid. The other younger, perhaps 8, leaning against her sister's shoulder. Daniel noticed them as his patrol car rolled past at 40 miles per hour. He'd noticed them before. They were there yesterday and the day before that, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, always in the same spot, like they were waiting for something that would never come. The younger one wore a jacket too big for her frame. The older one held her hand tight. Daniel's foot hovered over the brake. Then he kept driving. He told himself it wasn't his problem. The county social services handled these things. There were procedures, protocols. He was just a cop 3 months from retirement, 68 years old and counting down the days until he could finally stop carrying the weight of other people's tragedies. He'd tried helping before. 5 years ago, he'd called in a report about a kid who looked neglected. Turned out the mother was a nurse, working double shifts, doing everything she could. Daniel had been accused of profiling, of overstepping. The complaint had gone into his file. He learned his lesson. Mind your business. But as the bus stop disappeared in his rearview mirror, something gnawed at him. It wasn't the way they were dressed. It wasn't even that they were alone. It was the silence. The older girl hadn't been talking, hadn't been on a phone, hadn't been doing anything except holding her sister's hand like she was preparing for something terrible. And the way the younger one was sitting. Daniel shook his head and turned onto Main Street. Not his problem. He had 3 months left, just 3 months. But that night, lying in his empty house with the television flickering in the darkness, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about that bench, about 2 girls waiting for nothing, and about the last time he'd ignored his gut. The trailer park sat 2 miles outside Millbrook, hidden behind a line of skeletal trees and a faded billboard advertising a hardware store that had closed in 2008. Unit 27 was at the very end of the gravel road. Lily Monroe stood at the cracked kitchen sink, pumping the hand lever because the electric water heater had stopped working in June. Cold water trickled into a dented pot. She'd heat it on the camping stove later, the one she'd found at a yard sale for $3. "Emma, did you finish your homework?" Lily called over her shoulder. Her little sister sat at the fold-out table, coloring in the margins of a worksheet. Emma's stomach pressed against the edge of the table, round and swollen beneath her oversized sweater. "Almost," Emma said softly. Lily watched her for a moment. 8 years old. Too young to understand why people stared. Too innocent to hear the whispers at the grocery store. But Lily heard them. She heard everything. Lily crossed the small space and knelt beside her sister. Emma's backpack sat on the floor, one strap torn and hanging loose. Lily had tried fixing it with duct tape last week, but it hadn't held. "Here," Lily said, pulling a needle and thread from the drawer. "Let me fix this properly." She sat on the floor and began stitching the frayed fabric, her fingers moving carefully. Mama had taught her to sew before everything fell apart, before the pills, before the silence, before the morning Lily had found her on the bathroom floor and couldn't wake her up. That was 7 months ago. Nobody had come to check on them since the funeral. A neighbor had brought a casserole once. The school secretary had asked if Lily had family. Lily had lied and said yes, an aunt in Chicago who called every week. There was no aunt. There was no one. "Lily?" Emma's voice was small. "My stomach hurts again." Lily's hands paused mid-stitch. "Is it bad?" Emma shook her head, but Lily saw her wince as she shifted in the chair. It was getting worse. Lily knew it. The swelling had started months ago, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. She'd taken Emma to the free clinic in September, but the nurse had barely looked at her before scribbling something on a form and handing Lily a number to call. Lily had called 3 times. Each time a recorded voice told her the wait list was 6 to 8 weeks. That was 10 weeks ago. "It's okay," Lily whispered, tying off the thread and slipping the backpack over Emma's shoulders. "See? Good as new." Emma smiled, the kind of smile that broke Lily's heart because it was so trusting, so full of belief that her big sister could fix anything. But Lily couldn't fix this, and she was terrified of what would happen if someone found out. Daniel Harper sat in his living room, staring at a photograph on the mantel. Sarah, his daughter, 23 years old in that picture. Bright smile, graduation cap tilted slightly to the left. She'd been so proud that day, holding her nursing degree like it was made of gold. That was 15 years ago. She'd only worked as a nurse for 2 years before she got sick. It started with fatigue, then dizziness, then pain she couldn't explain. She went to 3 different doctors. Each one told her the same thing: stress, lack of sleep, probably just adjusting to the demands of the job. "You're young," one doctor had said. "You're healthy. Get more rest." But Sarah kept getting worse. By the time someone finally ordered the right tests, it was too late. An undiagnosed autoimmune condition had damaged her kidneys beyond repair. She needed a transplant that never came in time. Daniel had held her hand in that hospital room as the machines beeped and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He'd watched the life drain from her eyes while doctors shuffled past in the hallway, moving on to the next patient. She died on a Tuesday. He still hated Tuesdays. Daniel set the photograph back down and rubbed his eyes. He'd been a cop for 42 years. He'd seen terrible things: accidents, violence, families torn apart by choices and circumstances. But nothing had prepared him for the helplessness of watching his own daughter suffer because people hadn't looked closely enough. That was 12 years ago. His wife, Margaret, had lasted 3 years after Sarah's death before her own heart gave out. The doctor called it a cardiac event. Daniel called it a broken heart. Now the house was empty except for memories. He'd thought about retiring early. But what would he do? Sit here alone and think about everyone he'd lost? At least on patrol, he could drive, keep moving, stay busy. He glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Tomorrow he'd drive Route 47 again, past that bus stop, past those 2 girls, and tomorrow, just like today, he'd keep driving. Because the last time he'd gotten involved, he'd been wrong, and being wrong had cost him professionally. It had put a mark on his record, made him cautious, made him hesitant. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept circling through his mind. What if this time he was wrong about not getting involved? What if those girls needed someone to look closer? What if ignoring them was the mistake? Daniel closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come easy. Somewhere in the darkness, he could still hear Sarah's voice from that hospital bed. "Dad, don't let anyone else go through this." He hadn't kept that promise. Not yet. Millbrook was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business, except when they didn't want to. At the corner mart on Thursday morning, Linda Pritchard stood behind the cash register, ringing up lottery tickets and coffee for the early crowd. She'd worked there for 19 years. She knew every face that walked through that door, including Lily Monroe's. The girl came in every few days, counting coins carefully before buying bread, peanut butter, the cheapest cereal. Always polite. Always quiet, always alone except when her little sister tagged along. "That Monroe girl was in here again," Linda said to her co-worker during the lunch shift. "Still buying food with spare change?" "Someone should call somebody," the co-worker muttered. "Not my place," Linda replied, restocking cigarettes. Besides, didn't the school handle that after the mother passed? Nobody knew for sure. At Millbrook Elementary, Mrs. Patterson had noticed Emma Monroe's absences piling up. 3 days in September, 4 in October. The girl looked tired when she did show up, and she'd started wearing clothes that didn't fit right anymore. Mrs. Patterson had filed a report with the school counselor back in November. She'd checked the system twice since then. No follow-up, no response, no visit. The counselor had left a voicemail with county services. That's all the paperwork required. After that, it was out of her hands. I did what I was supposed to do, Mrs. Patterson told herself. At the Millbrook Medical Clinic, Dr. Ashok Mehta reviewed his patient notes from September. Emma Monroe, age 8. Complaint: abdominal swelling. Possible malnutrition. He'd recommended blood work and imaging. He'd written the referral himself, but the family had no insurance. The county program required pre-authorization. By the time he'd filled out the forms and submitted them, the case had fallen into a backlog. He'd meant to follow up. But the clinic saw 40 patients a day. There were always more forms, more cases, more people waiting. "We're doing the best we can," he told the nurse when she asked about the Monroe file. The nurse didn't ask again. On Friday afternoon, Daniel drove past the bus stop again. The two girls were there. The older one stared straight ahead, her face pale and drawn. The younger one leaned against her, eyes half closed. Daniel slowed down this time. Just for a second. He saw the way Emma's hand rested on her swollen stomach. He saw the way Lily held her sister close, like she was shielding her from the world. And for the first time, Daniel noticed something else. Emma wasn't just tired. She was trembling. His hand moved toward the radio. He could call it in, request a welfare check. But then he remembered the last time, the complaint, the accusation. His hand dropped back to the steering wheel. He drove past. Behind him, Lily watched the patrol car disappear down the road. She'd seen him slow down. For a moment, she'd thought he might stop. But he didn't. No one ever did. On Monday morning, Lily sat in the waiting room of the County Health Services building, holding Emma's hand. They'd been there for 2 hours. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A television in the corner played a morning talk show with the volume too low to hear. Across from them, a mother bounced a crying baby on her knee. An elderly man coughed into his elbow. Emma shifted in the plastic chair, wincing. "It's okay," Lily whispered. "They'll call us soon." But she didn't believe it. She'd called the number on the form Dr. Mehta had given her back in September. After 4 tries, someone finally answered. A tired voice told her to come in on Monday at 9 a.m. Bring identification. Bring proof of residence. Bring the referral paperwork. Lily had brought everything. At 11:30, a woman in scrubs appeared at the door with a clipboard. "Monroe?" Lily stood quickly, pulling Emma up with her. They followed the woman down a narrow hallway into a small office. The woman sat behind a desk covered in stacks of folders. She didn't smile. "Name of guardian?" Lily hesitated. "I'm her sister." "Legal guardian?" "Our mother passed away in April." The woman typed something into her computer. "And your father?" "Not in the picture." More typing. "Who has custody?" Lily's throat tightened. We're managing." The woman looked up for the first time. Her eyes were flat, worn down by too many cases and not enough resources. "You're 12 years old. You can't have legal custody of your sister. I need to contact Child Protective Services." "No," Lily said quickly. "Please, we're fine. We just need someone to see her. She's been sick for months and nobody will help us." The woman sighed and leaned back in her chair. "I understand. But I can't authorize treatment without a legal guardian present. It's policy. But the doctor said she needed tests, blood work, something to figure out what's wrong. And those tests require parental consent. Our parents are gone." The woman's expression softened slightly, but her voice stayed firm. "Then we need to involve social services. That's the law." Lily felt Emma's hand squeeze hers tighter. "How long will that take?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 6 to 8 weeks, maybe longer. The system is overloaded right now." "She doesn't have 8 weeks." The woman closed the folder. "We're doing the best we can. I'm sorry." Lily stood up, pulling Emma with her. Her hands were shaking, her chest felt tight. "Let's go," she said quietly. They walked back through the waiting room, past the crying baby and the coughing man and the people still waiting for their names to be called. Outside, the cold air hit Lily's face like a slap. Emma looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Are they going to take me away?" Lily knelt down and took both of Emma's hands in hers. "No, I won't let that happen. I promise." But even as she said it, Lily knew the truth. She was 12 years old. She couldn't stop anything. That night, Lily sat on the edge of Emma's bed in the tiny trailer, pulling a thin blanket up to her sister's chin. Emma's face was pale in the dim light of the battery-powered lamp. They'd run out of propane for the heater 2 days ago, and the November cold seeped through the thin metal walls. "Lily," Emma's voice was small. "Yeah? What if they come and take me away from you?" Lily's chest tightened. She'd been afraid of that question. "They won't," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "But that lady said—" "I don't care what she said." Lily brushed a strand of red hair from Emma's forehead. "You're my sister. We're family. Nobody's going to separate us." Emma stared up at her with those big, trusting eyes. The kind of eyes that believed everything would be okay because Lily said so. "Promise?" Lily swallowed hard. "I promise." Emma shifted under the blanket, her hand moving to her swollen stomach. She'd stopped asking why it hurt. She'd stopped complaining. She just endured it quietly, the way she endured everything else. "Lily?" "Yeah, Em. Please don't let them take me away from you." Those words hit Lily like a punch to the gut. She leaned down and wrapped her arms around her little sister, holding her as tightly as she dared without hurting her. "I won't," Lily whispered into Emma's hair. "I promise, I won't." But as she said it, tears burned behind her eyes. Because she didn't know how to keep that promise. She didn't know how to fix this. The next morning, Daniel Harper drove Route 47 at his usual time. 7:43 a.m. The bus stop came into view. The two girls were there again. But something was different. The younger one wasn't sitting up anymore. She was lying across the bench, her head in her sister's lap. The older girl sat perfectly still, one hand resting on her sister's shoulder. Daniel's foot moved to the brake. He slowed the patrol car. 30 miles per hour. 20. 15. He pulled onto the shoulder and put the car in park. For a long moment he just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the two girls through the windshield. The older one looked up. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Daniel saw something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't fear. It was resignation. The look of someone who had stopped expecting help. The same look Sarah had in the hospital before she'd stopped fighting. Daniel reached for the radio. His hand hesitated. Then he picked it up. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need a welfare check and an ambulance at the old bus stop on Route 47, mile marker 14. The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "What's the situation, Daniel?" He looked at the two girls again. The younger one hadn't moved. "I've got a child who needs medical attention. Now." "Copy that. Ambulance is en route. ETA 12 minutes. Daniel stepped out of the car. The older girl stood up slowly, her body tense, protective. "It's okay," Daniel said, raising his hands. "I'm here to help." But the girl didn't move. She just held her sister closer and whispered something Daniel would never forget. "Please don't take her from me." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he stood at the edge of the road, 10 feet from the bus stop. The wind picked up, cutting through his uniform jacket. The smell of diesel and wet asphalt hung in the air. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed. Everything felt too loud, too sharp. "I'm not here to take anyone anywhere," Daniel said carefully, keeping his voice low and steady. "But your sister needs a doctor. You know that, don't you?" Lily's jaw tightened. She didn't answer. Emma stirred slightly on the bench, her eyes fluttering open. She looked confused, disoriented. Daniel took one step closer. Lily immediately tensed. "Stay back." "I'm not going to hurt you," Daniel said. "I promise. But look at her. Really look at her." Lily's eyes dropped to Emma's face. Her sister's skin was gray, her breathing shallow. "The ambulance is coming," Daniel continued. "They're going to take her to the hospital. They're going to figure out what's wrong. That's all. And then what? Lily's voice cracked. Then they separate us. They put her in one place and me in another, and I never see her again. Daniel felt something twist inside his chest. He thought of Sarah, of the promises he'd made, the ones he couldn't keep. I won't let that happen, he heard himself say. Lily looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. You can't promise that. She was right. He couldn't. But he was done walking away. The sound of sirens broke through the silence, distant at first, then growing louder. Red and white lights flickered through the trees. Lily's breath came faster. She looked down at Emma, then back at Daniel, trapped between fear and desperation. Please, she whispered. She's all I have. Daniel stepped closer, slowly, his hands still raised. Then let me help you keep her. The ambulance pulled onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. 2 paramedics jumped out, moving quickly toward the bus stop. Step aside, sir, one of them said, brushing past Daniel. The other knelt beside Emma, checking her pulse, her eyes, her breathing. How long has she been like this? The paramedic asked. Lily couldn't speak. She just stared as they lifted Emma onto a stretcher, strapping her down gently. Miss, we need to know her medical history, the paramedic said. Is there a parent or guardian we can contact? Lily shook her head. The paramedic looked at Daniel. I'll ride with them, Daniel said. Are you family? No, but I'm all they've got right now. The paramedic hesitated, then nodded. Let's move. They loaded Emma into the ambulance. Lily climbed in behind her, refusing to let go of her sister's hand. Daniel stood at the open doors, his radio crackling on his belt. Dispatch was asking for an update. Protocols required him to call Child Protective Services, to file a report, to follow procedure. But as he looked at Lily's terrified face and Emma's pale, fragile body, he made a choice. He climbed into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut. The sirens wailed. And for the first time in 12 years, Daniel Harper stopped following the rules. He followed his gut. The emergency room at Millbrook Regional Hospital smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Daniel sat in a hard plastic chair, watching Lily pace back and forth across the worn linoleum floor. She hadn't sat down since they'd arrived 20 minutes ago. Emma had been wheeled through double doors marked, "Authorized personnel only." A nurse had tried to get Lily to stay in the waiting room, but she'd refused until Daniel gently convinced her that the doctors needed space to work. Now they waited. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. 9:17 a.m. A woman in scrubs approached, clipboard in hand. Are you here with Emma Monroe? Lily rushed forward. Is she okay? The nurse's expression was neutral, professional. The doctor is examining her now. We need some information. Are your parents here? Lily's face went pale. Our mother passed away in April. The nurse made a note. And your father? Not around. Is there another adult guardian? Daniel stood up. I'm Officer Harper. I brought them in. The nurse looked at him, then back at Lily. We'll need to contact social services, hospital policy for unaccompanied minors. Please, Lily said, her voice breaking. Just help my sister first. The nurse's expression softened slightly. The doctor will be out soon to talk to you. She disappeared back through the double doors. Lily sank into a chair, her hands shaking. Daniel sat beside her. They're going to take care of her, and then they're going to take her away from me. Daniel didn't have an answer for that. 45 minutes later, a doctor emerged. Young, maybe 35, with kind eyes and tired shoulders. Family of Emma Monroe? Lily jumped to her feet. The doctor gestured toward a quieter corner of the waiting room. Daniel and Lily followed. I'm Dr. Rachel Chen, she said. I've examined Emma, and we've run some preliminary tests. What's wrong with her? Lily asked. Dr. Chen hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The abdominal swelling you've noticed. It's not what we initially suspected. Daniel felt his stomach drop. What does that mean? Lily whispered. It means Emma isn't pregnant, if that's what people have been assuming. Lily's face flushed red. I never thought... I know, Dr. Chen said gently. But given her age and the visible symptoms, it's a common misinterpretation. Then what is it? Daniel asked. Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. We found a significant mass in her abdomen. We need to do imaging and more blood work to determine exactly what we're dealing with, but... She paused. But what? Lily's voice was barely audible. But it's large enough that it's putting pressure on her internal organs. That's why she's been in pain. Why she's been so tired. The words hung in the air like a weight. Lily's legs seemed to give out. She grabbed the edge of a chair to steady herself. Is she going to die? The question came out as a broken whisper. We don't know yet, Dr. Chen said, but I need to be honest with you. This should have been caught sooner, much sooner. Daniel felt ice spread through his chest. How much sooner? He asked. Dr. Chen looked at him directly. Months, maybe longer. Lily made a sound like she'd been hit. Can you fix it? She asked. We're going to do everything we can, but first, we need those tests, and we need legal authorization to treat her. There it was again. Legal authorization. The system. How long will the tests take? Daniel asked. A few hours. We're making her a priority. Dr. Chen's pager beeped. She glanced at it, then back at them. I'll update you as soon as I know more. She walked away, leaving Daniel and Lily standing in the fluorescent light of the waiting room. Lily turned to Daniel, tears streaming down her face. This is my fault, she whispered. I should have done more. I should have made them listen. Daniel put a hand on her shoulder. No, he said firmly. This is not your fault. But deep down, a voice whispered in his mind. Whose fault is it then? 3 hours later, Dr. Chen returned. Her face was grave. Daniel and Lily stood up immediately. They'd been sitting in silence, watching the clock, watching other families come and go, watching nurses move through the hallway with purpose. We have the results, Dr. Chen said. She led them to a small consultation room. 4 chairs, a box of tissues on the table, the kind of room designed for difficult conversations. They sat down. Dr. Chen opened a folder but didn't look at it. She looked at Lily instead. Emma has a large abdominal tumor, she said quietly. It's been growing for some time. Based on the imaging, I'd estimate 6 to 8 months, possibly longer. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. The tumor is pressing against her stomach, her intestines, and her kidneys. That's why she's been having pain, why she's been losing weight despite the swelling, why she's been so exhausted. Can you remove it? Daniel asked. We can, but there's more. Dr. Chen paused. The tumor appears to be malignant. The word hung in the air like poison, malignant. Lily's face went white. You mean cancer? We'll need a biopsy to confirm, but yes, that's what we suspect. But she's 8 years old, Lily whispered. I know. Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. Pediatric cancers are rare, but they do happen. The good news is that we caught it. It's operable. With surgery and treatment, there's a strong chance of recovery. And if you hadn't caught it? Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. Dr. Chen met his eyes. If she'd waited another week, maybe 2, the pressure on her organs could have caused serious complications. Kidney failure, sepsis, it would have been much worse. Lily covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Dr. Chen reached across the table and gently touched her arm. Lily, you saved your sister's life by bringing her here today. I didn't bring her, Lily said through her tears. I tried to hide her. I was scared they'd take her away from me. You were protecting her the only way you knew how. Daniel felt something crack inside his chest. He thought of all the times he'd driven past that bus stop, all the times he'd seen them and done nothing. Doctor, he said slowly, you mentioned this has been growing for months. Would there have been signs? Things people should have noticed? Dr. Chen nodded. Absolutely. Fatigue, loss of appetite, abdominal swelling, pain. Any medical professional who examined her should have ordered tests immediately. And if someone had reported concerns, to the school or social services. Dr. Chen's expression darkened. Then yes, this could have been caught much earlier. when the tumor was smaller, before it caused this much damage. Daniel pulled out his phone and opened his work email. He scrolled back through months of reports and flagged cases, and there it was. September 14th. A welfare check request. Monroe residence. 2 minors, possible neglect, assigned to Officer D. Harper. Status cleared. No immediate danger observed. His hands started shaking. He'd been there. He'd stood outside that trailer in September, knocked on the door, talked to Lily for 5 minutes, and decided everything was fine. He'd written stable home environment in his report. He'd closed the case. Officer Harper? Dr. Chen's voice seemed far away. Are you all right? Daniel looked up at her, then at Lily. I was there, he said quietly. In September. Someone called in a concern about you two. I responded to it. Lily stared at him, confusion and hurt flooding her face. You came to our trailer? Yes. And you left? Yes. The silence was crushing. Why? Lily's voice broke. Why didn't you help us? Daniel had no answer, no excuse, just the truth. Because I was afraid of being wrong again. And now Emma was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. Because he'd been too afraid to look closer. Daniel walked out of the consultation room and down the hospital corridor, his chest tight, his vision blurring. He pushed through the exit door and stepped into the cold November air. The parking lot stretched out before him, cars gleaming under the gray sky. He leaned against the brick wall and closed his eyes. September 14th. He remembered that day now, remembered pulling up to the trailer park, the gravel crunching under his tires, remembered knocking on the door of Unit 27. Lily had answered, polite, cautious. She'd told him everything was fine, that their aunt checked in regularly, that they had food, utilities, everything they needed. He'd looked past her into the trailer, seen the small kitchen, the fold-out table, no obvious signs of danger. Emma had been at school that day. He never saw her. He'd written his report in the car. Minors appear healthy and cared for, residents modest but adequate, older sibling mature and responsible, no immediate concerns, case closed. 3 sentences. That's all it had taken to walk away. Daniel pulled out his phone and scrolled through his old reports again. But this time he kept going back. July 29th. Anonymous tip about children living alone at Monroe residence. Forwarded to County Social Services. August 12th. School counselor submitted concern form. No follow-up documented. September 3rd. Free clinic visit for Emma Monroe. Referral submitted for imaging. Status, pending insurance authorization. September 14th. His welfare check. Case closed. The pattern was clear. The system had failed, but so had he. The door opened behind him. Lily stepped out, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. They're prepping Emma for surgery, she said quietly. They want to remove the tumor as soon as possible. Daniel nodded but didn't turn around. Dr. Chen said you can sign as a temporary guardian, Lily continued, since you're the officer who brought us in. Just until social services assign someone. I'll sign whatever they need. Silence stretched between them. You really came to our house in September? Lily finally asked. Yes. And I lied to you. I told you we were fine. Daniel turned to face her. You were 12 years old trying to keep your sister safe. That's not lying, that's surviving. But if I'd told you the truth, then what? Daniel interrupted. You would have been separated, put into different homes. You knew that. That's why you lied. Lily's eyes filled with tears. But Emma would have gotten help sooner. Maybe. Or maybe the system would have failed her anyway. Daniel's voice was rough. I read the reports, Lily. People tried. Your school, the clinic, social services. Everyone filled out the right forms, made the right calls, and nothing happened. Because no one cared enough to follow through. No, Daniel said firmly. Because the system is broken. There aren't enough people, aren't enough resources. Cases fall through the cracks every single day. Emma almost died because she fell through a crack. Daniel felt the words like a knife. Yes, he said. She did. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. That day you came to our trailer. If you'd pushed harder, if you'd asked more questions, would it have made a difference? Daniel wanted to say no, wanted to believe that nothing he could have done would have changed the outcome. But he'd spent 12 years lying to himself about Sarah, telling himself he'd done everything he could, that the doctors were to blame, that the system was to blame, and maybe they were. But so was he. Yes, he said quietly. It would have made a difference. Lily stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something Daniel didn't expect. She stepped forward and hugged him. It was brief, awkward, the kind of hug from someone who hadn't been hugged in a very long time. When she pulled back, her face was wet with tears. "Thank you for stopping today," she whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. "I should have stopped sooner. But you stopped." And somehow, in that moment, it felt like the only thing that mattered. The surgery took 6 hours. Daniel stayed in the waiting room the entire time, sitting beside Lily. She didn't say much, just stared at the clock, counting the minutes. At some point, a social worker arrived, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Patricia Gonzalez. She spoke quietly with Lily, asked questions, took notes. Daniel explained the situation. Patricia listened, her face unreadable. "I'll need to file a report," she said. "But given the medical emergency, we can defer placement decisions until Emma is stable." "What does that mean?" Lily asked. "It means you stay together for now," Patricia said. "But we'll need to find a more permanent solution." Lily nodded, too exhausted to argue. By evening, word had spread through Millbrook. Small towns were like that. News traveled fast. At the corner mart, Linda Pritchard heard about Emma's surgery from a customer. She stood behind the register, staring at the lottery tickets, remembering all the times she'd watched Lily count change for bread. "I should have done something," she said to her coworker. "You reported it to someone, didn't you?" "I told the school counselor once, but that was it. I didn't follow up." Linda closed the register and grabbed her coat. "Where are you going?" her coworker asked. "To the hospital." She arrived with a bag of groceries, peanut butter, cereal, bread. The things she'd seen Lily buy 100 times. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mrs. Patterson, Emma's teacher, showed up an hour later with a stuffed bear and a card signed by Emma's classmates. "I filed a report," she told Daniel quietly, "in November. I don't know why nobody followed up." "A lot of people filed reports," Daniel said. "The system was overloaded." Mrs. Patterson's eyes welled with tears. "That little girl sat in my classroom for months, and I didn't push hard enough." Dr. Maida from the clinic came next. He didn't bring anything. He just stood in the waiting room, looking lost. "I wrote the referral," he said to no one in particular. "I submitted it 3 times. I called twice, but I stopped calling." "You did what you could," Patricia said gently. "Did I?" Dr. Maida shook his head. "I see 40 patients a day. I can't follow up on every case. But this one, I should have." At 8:47 p.m., Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical wing. Everyone in the waiting room stood up. Lily's face was pale. "The surgery went well," Dr. Chen said, and the relief in the room was palpable. "We removed the tumor. It was larger than we expected, but we got it all." "Is she going to be okay?" Lily asked. "She's going to need treatment, chemotherapy. It'll be hard, but yes, I believe she's going to be okay." Lily collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Daniel put a hand on her shoulder. Around them, people who had failed Emma in small ways stood quietly, carrying their own guilt. Linda clutched her bag of groceries. Mrs. Patterson held the stuffed bear. Dr. Mehta stared at the floor. "Can I see her?" Lily asked. "She's in recovery," Dr. Chen said. "Give her another hour, then yes." Lily nodded, wiping her eyes. Patricia sat down beside her. "We need to talk about where you'll stay tonight." "I want to stay here." "The hospital won't allow—" "I'll take her," Daniel said. Everyone turned to look at him. "I have a guest room," he continued. "It's not much, but it's warm. She can stay with me until we figure something out." Patricia frowned. "Officer Harper, you're not an approved foster placement. Then approve me temporarily, or I'll sleep in my car outside this hospital. Either way, I'm not leaving her alone. Patricia studied him for a long moment. Then she sighed. One night, she said. We'll reassess tomorrow. Daniel nodded. Lily looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. Thank you, she whispered. It wasn't enough. Nothing could undo the months of suffering, but it was a start. Emma's first round of chemotherapy began 2 weeks later. Daniel drove Lily to the hospital every other day. They'd settled into a routine. Breakfast at 7, school for Lily when she could focus, hospital visits in the afternoon. Emma's room was on the 3rd floor, painted pale yellow with cartoon animals on the walls. It was meant to feel cheerful. It didn't. Emma sat in the chair by the window, an IV line running into her thin arm. She'd lost weight since the surgery. Her face was drawn, her eyes tired. How are you feeling today, sweetheart? The nurse asked, checking the monitors. Okay, Emma said quietly. She always said okay, even when she wasn't. Lily sat beside her, holding her hand. She'd barely left Emma's side since the surgery. School had become secondary. Patricia had tried to insist, but Lily refused. She needs me, was all she'd say. The chemotherapy made Emma sick. Not right away, but hours later. The nausea would hit, sudden and overwhelming. She'd lean over the plastic basin, retching until there was nothing left. Lily held her hair back. Daniel stood in the doorway, feeling helpless. He'd faced armed suspects, high-speed chases, dangerous situations where he'd kept his composure. But watching an 8-year-old girl suffer was different. There was nothing he could do. No protocol to follow. No way to fix it. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, Emma looked up at Lily with tears streaming down her face. I want to go home, she whispered. I know, Em. Soon. When? Lily didn't have an answer. Dr. Chen had explained the treatment plan. 6 months of chemotherapy, maybe longer depending on how Emma responded. The tumor had been removed, but there was still risk of recurrence. They had to be aggressive. Emma's hair started falling out in early December, first in small clumps on the pillow, then more. Within a week, it was gone completely. Lily cried when she saw it. Emma just stared at herself in the mirror, running her hand over her smooth head. Do I look scary? She asked. No, Lily said quickly. You look beautiful. I look sick. Lily pulled her sister into a hug. You look brave. That night, Daniel found Lily sitting in his kitchen, staring at nothing. She's going to lose everything, Lily said. Her hair, her strength, her childhood. But not her life, Daniel said gently. Lily looked up at him. Is that enough? Daniel thought of Sarah, of the things she'd lost before she died. Time, dreams, future. Yes, he said. It's enough. But he knew it didn't feel like enough. Not when you were 12 years old, watching your sister suffer. Not when you were 8 years old, too sick to understand why. 2 days before Christmas, Emma spiked a fever. 103 degrees. Dr. Chen admitted her immediately. Infection was a serious risk during chemotherapy. Lily refused to leave the hospital. Daniel brought her clothes, food, a blanket. He sat with her in the darkened room while Emma slept, machines beeping softly. What if she doesn't make it? Lily whispered. She will. You don't know that. Daniel was quiet for a moment. No, he admitted. I don't, but I know she's fighting. And so are you. Lily leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in months she let herself believe it might be true. By mid-January, Emma's fever broke. The infection cleared. Her strength slowly returned. Not completely, but enough to sit up in bed, to smile occasionally, to ask for books from the hospital library. Dr. Chen reviewed her latest scans with cautious optimism. The tumor hasn't returned, she said. Her body is responding to treatment. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is progress. Real progress. Lily started attending school again, though Daniel drove her to the hospital every afternoon. Patricia had arranged for a tutor to help Emma keep up with her studies, but most days Emma was too tired to focus. That was okay. There were more important things than math worksheets. Daniel's house had changed over the past 2 months. The guest room that had sat empty for years now had 2 beds. Lily's backpack hung on a hook by the door. Emma's stuffed bear, the one from Mrs. Patterson, sat on the dresser. It felt like a home again. Patricia visited once a week to check on the arrangement. Officially, it was temporary. Unofficially, she'd stopped pushing for alternative placements. "You're good with them," she told Daniel one afternoon. "They trust you." "I'm 68 years old," Daniel said. "I can't be their permanent solution." "Why not?" Daniel didn't have a good answer. In February, Emma had her final chemotherapy session. The nurses decorated her IV pole with balloons and streamers. Other patients in the ward clapped as she walked down the hallway, pushing her pole like a finish line. Lily walked beside her, tears streaming down her face. "We did it, Em," she whispered. "You did it." Emma was too exhausted to celebrate, but she smiled. It was the first real smile Daniel had seen in months. That evening, Dr. Chen sat them down in the consultation room, the same room where she'd delivered the diagnosis 4 months earlier. "Emma's treatment is complete," she said. "Now we monitor. Regular scans, blood work, checkups every 6 weeks for the first year, then every 3 months. And if it comes back," Lily asked quietly, "then we treat it again. But right now the scans are clear. That's what matters." Lily nodded, but Daniel saw the fear in her eyes, the fear that this wasn't over, that it might never be over. "She's going to need time to recover," Dr. Chen continued. "Her immune system is weak. She'll be tired for months. But children are resilient. She'll heal." "Can she come home?" Emma asked softly. Dr. Chen smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. You can go home." Emma looked at Lily, then at Daniel. "Where's home?" she asked. The question hung in the air. Patricia shifted in her seat. "We're still working on long-term placement options." "She can stay with me," Daniel said. "Both of them," Patricia sighed. "Daniel, you know it's not that simple. The county requires background checks, home inspections, training for foster parents. Then start the process. You're 68 years old. The system prioritizes younger placements." "The system failed them," Daniel said firmly. "I won't." Patricia looked at Lily and Emma, 2 girls who'd survived more than most adults ever would. "I'll see what I can do," she said quietly. That night, Daniel drove them back to his house. Emma fell asleep in the back seat before they reached the driveway. Lily helped carry her inside, tucking her into bed with the stuffed bear. She stood in the doorway watching her sister breathe. "She looks peaceful," Lily said. "She is," Daniel replied. For the first time in a very long time. They both were. Spring arrived slowly in Millbrook. The snow melted. The trees began to bud. Emma's hair started growing back in soft, uneven patches. She'd returned to school in March, part-time at first. The other children stared at her bare head, her thin frame, the way she tired easily. But Mrs. Patterson made sure Emma felt welcome. She explained to the class gently that Emma had been very sick but was getting better. Most of the children understood. Some even brought her drawings and cards. Emma kept them all in a shoebox under her bed. By April, life had found a rhythm. Daniel had officially applied to become a foster parent. The process was slow, bureaucratic, but Patricia was pushing it through. Home inspections, background checks, training sessions. He'd retired from the police force in March. His colleagues had thrown him a small party, cake, a plaque, handshakes and well wishes. But Daniel didn't feel retired. He felt like he'd finally found his purpose. Then on a Tuesday afternoon in late April, Dr. Chen called. "I need you to bring Emma in," she said, her voice careful. "There's something on her latest scan." Daniel's blood turned to ice. "What kind of something?" "I'd rather discuss it in person." He hung up and found Lily in the kitchen, doing homework at the table. "We need to go to the hospital," he said, keeping his voice steady. Lily looked up and immediately knew. "No," she whispered. She was doing so well. "We don't know anything yet." But they both knew what it could mean. "Doctor." Chen met them in her office, the same room where they'd heard the word malignant for the first time. Emma sat between Lily and Daniel, her small hand gripping her sister's. The scan showed a small abnormality near where the original tumor was, Dr. Chen said carefully. It could be scar tissue, it could be inflammation from the treatment, or it could be recurrence. You mean the cancer came back, Lily said, her voice flat. We don't know that yet. We need to do more tests. A biopsy. Another surgery? Emma's voice was small, frightened. A small one, just to take a sample. We'll know more after that. Daniel felt the walls closing in. They'd fought so hard, come so far, and now this. When? He asked. Tomorrow morning. I've already scheduled the OR. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her stuffed bear clutched against her chest. Lily sat beside her, holding her hand. I don't want to go back, Emma whispered. I don't want to be sick again. I know. What if it doesn't stop? What if I have to do this forever? Lily's throat tightened. She didn't have an answer. She was 14 now, old enough to understand that some things couldn't be fixed with promises. Old enough to know that sometimes hope wasn't enough. Do you remember what you asked me? Lily said quietly. At the bus stop before Officer Harper stopped? Emma nodded. You asked me not to let them take you away from me. I remember. Lily squeezed her hand. I'm still here, Em. No matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Promise? I promise. They lay there in the darkness, two sisters who'd survived more than they should have had to. But survival wasn't the same as safety, and safety wasn't the same as certainty. The next morning, Daniel drove them to the hospital in silence. The procedure took less than an hour. Then they waited. 3 days for the biopsy results. 3 days that felt like 3 years. Daniel sat in his living room on Friday evening, watching the news without really seeing it. His phone rang. Dr. Chen. His heart pounded as he answered. Daniel, she said, and he heard something in her voice. Relief. It's not cancer, she said. It's scar tissue. Emma's clear. Daniel closed his eyes, his hand shaking. You're sure? I'm sure. She's okay. She's going to be okay. He hung up and walked to Emma's room, where both girls were doing a puzzle on the floor. They looked up when he entered, and from the expression on his face they knew. Lily started crying first. Then Emma. Then Daniel. They sat on the floor together, holding each other, crying tears of relief and exhaustion and something that felt like grace. It wasn't over. Emma would need monitoring for years. Scans, appointments. The shadow of recurrence would always be there. But today, right now, she was okay. And sometimes that was all you could ask for. The old bus stop on Route 47 looked exactly the same as it had a year ago. Weathered concrete bench, rusted metal sign, tall grass pushing through cracks in the pavement. But everything else had changed. Daniel Harper sat on that bench on a warm afternoon in June, waiting. The sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the road. A gentle breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle and cut grass. He'd turned 69 last month. His retirement had become official. No more patrol car, no more radio calls, no more driving past problems and telling himself they weren't his responsibility. The door of the medical building across the street opened, and 2 figures emerged. Emma walked carefully, holding Lily's hand. She was 9 now, taller, stronger. Her red hair had grown back in soft curls that caught the sunlight. She still tired easily, still had appointments every 6 weeks, still carried the invisible weight of what she'd been through. But she was alive. Lily had turned 15 in March. She'd started high school in the fall, joined the art club, made a few friends. She still worried constantly about Emma, still woke up some nights checking to make sure her sister was breathing. But she was learning to be a teenager again. They crossed the street and sat down on either side of Daniel. How'd it go? Daniel asked. All clear, Emma said, swinging her legs. Dr. Chen said my blood work looks great. She also said I need to eat more vegetables, Emma added with a small smile. We'll work on that, Daniel said. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching cars pass on the highway. "Why are we sitting here?" Emma finally asked. "We could have just waited in the car." Daniel looked down at her. "Because this is where it started. Where I finally stopped running from what I was afraid of." "What were you afraid of?" Emma asked. "Being wrong, failing, making things worse instead of better." Lily leaned against his shoulder. "You didn't make things worse." "I almost did, by waiting so long." "But you didn't wait forever," Lily said quietly. "That's what matters." Daniel thought about that, about all the ways he'd failed before he'd finally succeeded. About Sarah and Margaret, and all the years he'd spent telling himself he couldn't save anyone. Patricia had finally approved his foster placement in February. The paperwork had taken months, but it was official now. Lily and Emma Monroe were in his care. Not adoption. The system didn't allow that for someone his age. But guardianship, legal and binding. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was real. "Officer Harper?" Emma's voice pulled him back to the present. "You can call me Daniel, sweetheart, you know that." "I know, but Officer Harper sounds more official." She smiled up at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did you stop that day? Really?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I saw your sister holding your hand," he said finally. "And I saw the way she was holding it, like she was afraid of losing you, like she was preparing to say goodbye." He paused, his throat tight. "My daughter died because people didn't look closely enough at what was wrong. I spent 12 years telling myself there was nothing I could have done differently. But that day, when I saw you two sitting here, I realized I had a choice. I could drive past like I always did, or I could stop and look closer." "And you stopped," Emma said softly. "I stopped." Emma leaned against his other shoulder, and for a long moment, the three of them sat on that bench together. A police car drove past, slowing slightly as the officer inside glanced at the bus stop. Daniel recognized him. Young guy, maybe 30, new to the force. The officer's eyes met Daniel's, then moved to the two girls. For a second, Daniel saw the same hesitation he'd carried for so many years. The same uncertainty about whether to get involved. Daniel nodded at him. The officer nodded back and drove on. "Do you think he'll stop if he needs to?" Lily asked, watching the patrol car disappear. "I hope so," Daniel said. "But if he doesn't, someone else will. That's what I learned. It only takes one person to look, one person to care, one person to stop." Emma shifted, looking up at him with those wide, trusting eyes. "Do you think other kids are sitting at bus stops right now, waiting for someone to notice?" Daniel's chest tightened. "Yes, I do." "Then we should tell people," Emma said simply. "Tell them to look. Tell them to stop," Lily added. Daniel smiled, something warm spreading through his chest. "You're right, we should." They stood up together, leaving the bus stop behind. Daniel's truck was parked in the medical center lot. As they walked toward it, Emma skipped ahead slightly, her energy returning now that the appointment was over. Lily walked beside Daniel, her hands in her pockets. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped?" she asked quietly. "Every day," Daniel admitted. "Me too." They reached the truck. Emma climbed into the back seat, already pulling out a book she'd brought. Before Lily got in, she turned to Daniel. "Thank you," she said, "for stopping, for staying, for not giving up on us even when the system tried to make you." Daniel's eyes stung. "Thank you for letting me." "We didn't really have a choice." "Yes, you did. You could have shut me out. Could have decided I was just another adult who'd let you down. But you didn't." Lily smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "You're not like the others. Neither are you." They drove home through the late afternoon sunshine, past fields turning green, past houses with families sitting on porches, past the elementary school where Emma would return in the fall, past the trailer park where Unit 27 still sat empty, a reminder of where they'd come from. When they pulled into Daniel's driveway, Mrs. Patterson's car was parked on the street. She stood on the porch holding a covered dish. "I made lasagna," she called out. "Thought you might like a home-cooked meal after the appointment." Linda from the corner mart pulled up behind her, carrying bags of groceries. "I grabbed some things I thought you might need," she said, looking slightly embarrassed, "and some ice cream, for Emma." Daniel felt something shift in his chest. This was what community looked like when people finally opened their eyes. Not perfect, not always on time, but present. That evening, they ate dinner together. Mrs. Patterson stayed, and Linda, and even Dr. Maida, who stopped by on his way home from the clinic. They sat around Daniel's dining room table, which hadn't seen this many people in over a decade. They talked about Emma's progress, about Lily's upcoming art show at school, about Daniel's garden that he'd started planting with the girls. Normal things, beautiful things. The kind of things that happened when people stopped being afraid to care. After everyone left, Daniel helped clean up the kitchen while Lily and Emma got ready for bed. He stood at the sink, washing dishes, looking out the window at the darkening sky. He thought about Sarah, about how she'd asked him not to let anyone else go through what she'd gone through. He'd failed that promise for 12 years, but not anymore. He dried his hands and walked upstairs to say goodnight. Emma was already asleep, her stuffed bear tucked under her arm, her face peaceful. Lily sat on her bed, drawing in a sketchbook. "What are you working on?" Daniel asked. She turned the book around. It was a drawing of the bus stop. But in her version, the bench wasn't empty. 2 girls sat there, holding hands, and standing beside them, one hand extended toward them, was a figure in a police uniform. Below the drawing, in careful letters, she'd written, "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop." Daniel's vision blurred. "Can I keep this?" he asked. "It's yours," Lily said. "You're the one who taught me what it means." He kissed the top of her head and turned off the light, leaving the door cracked open the way she liked it. Downstairs, he sat in his living room, holding Lily's drawing. The house was quiet, peaceful, full. He thought about the question Emma had asked at the bus stop. Were there other children out there waiting for someone to notice? Yes, there always would be. But maybe if enough people learned to stop, to look, to care, fewer of them would have to wait as long as Emma and Lily had. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that one person could save everyone, but that one person could save someone. And sometimes, that someone could change everything. Daniel set the drawing on the mantel next to Sarah's photograph. 2 reminders. One of what he'd lost. One of what he'd found. And in the quiet of that moment, Daniel Harper finally understood something he'd been searching for since the day his daughter died. Redemption didn't mean erasing the past. It meant choosing differently in the present. It meant being brave enough to stop when every instinct told you to keep driving. It meant looking at the people the world had decided to ignore and saying, "I see you, and you matter." Emma and Lily had survived because someone finally stopped. But more than that, they'd taught him something he'd forgotten, that it's never too late to look, never too late to care, never too late to be the person who makes the difference. And as Daniel turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, he carried that truth with him. Tomorrow he'd wake up in a house that was no longer empty. He'd make breakfast for 2 girls who'd once sat alone at a bus stop, invisible to a world that had stopped looking. He'd drive them to school, to appointments, to all the normal places that normal families went. And he'd remember that the greatest tragedy wasn't what could have happened. It was what almost didn't. Because in the end, the real danger was never the sickness. It was the silence, the looking away, the convincing ourselves that someone else would handle it. Daniel had spent a lifetime learning that lesson. But today, right now, in this moment, he finally understood it. And that understanding, hard-won and painful as it was, had saved 2 lives. Maybe it would save more, not through grand gestures or perfect solutions, but through the simple, radical act of stopping, of seeing, of caring, one person at a time, one bus stop at a time, one moment of courage at a time. That was enough, it had to be, because sometimes enough was all anyone needed. The end.